I think Buggy might be the deuteragonist of One Piece, meaning the second protagonist. And this comes to me in the form of color theory, and I'm surprised I didn't notice this earlier. So, when you're talking about primary colors, depending on the subject, the primary colors do change. So when you're talking about light, the primary colors are red, green, and blue. But when it comes to art, the order of primary colors does change. So in art, meaning traditional media, you have red, blue, and yellow. Then you have secondary colors like orange, green, and purple, made up of the combinations of the previously mentioned primary colors. But when you're talking about print, as in using print for, say, a magazine or whatever, you're talking about magenta, cyan, and yellow, which is very similar to red, blue, and yellow, but it's slightly different. But for the purpose of talking about One Piece, we'll be focusing on red, blue, and yellow. Red, blue, and yellow, most of the time, are used to represent main characters, such as Superman or Wonder Woman, right? But when you look at Luffy, he too is made up of those primary colors. His hat is yellow, his shirt is red, and his pants are blue, with variations of those colors throughout his design. He has gold buttons on his shirt, and he has a red ribbon around his hat. However, when you look at the four Yonko right now, it's very interesting that the only other character who is made up of primary colors to an absurd degree is Buggy. This is a very interesting development right now because it wasn't always like this for Buggy. When the series first started, Buggy mostly was made up of secondary colors. The big swaths of his design were all secondary colors. However, the two most important aspects of his design, his hair and his nose, have always been primary colors, red and blue respectively. So, when looking at his first appearance, he is wearing a mostly orange getup. He has an orange bicorn, he has an orange captain's coat, and then he has green pants and a purple ascot. So, again, mostly secondary colors. However, this starts to change once Impel Down kicks off, and then it changes further once Marineford starts, because Impel Down breaks him down to his basic elements. The only colors that he's wearing of any sort are on his face. He has red lipstick, he has his red nose, and he has his blue hair flowing in the wind majestically, right? So when the boys break out of Impel Down and we move on to Marineford, he regains his pirate getup, in which he substitutes a marine uniform to depict himself as a pirate once more, now having his bicorn back and a captain's coat. However, all of these clothing items are white, but the hat is trimmed in yellow. He regains a red striped shirt, and he does have burgundy pants, and the captain's coat does have burgundy accents. So he's shifting now to a more primary color dominated color scheme. And of course, the marine symbol on the hat is blue, much like his hair. So it's interesting now that when he was a pirate, his color scheme was mostly dominated by secondary colors. However, when he goes to jail, his colors are broken down and he's reduced to his basic elements. And then when he gets something resembling a pirate getup once more, that pirate getup is now shifting him more towards primary colors. This, however, comes to a head and stays that way once he becomes a warlord and the president of Buggy's delivery service, because now Buggy's the big red man. Buggy is mostly red now due to his weird onesie that he wears in the post time skip. And it's even more interesting because using his abilities, he's making himself look bigger than he actually is, which I find quite interesting. But even when he's not wearing the getup and he's just got his normal clothes on, his shirt is blue and his pants are yellow. But the purple that was once center stage at the start in the form of an ascot has now taken a backseat, just being a bandana under his magnificent hat and then a simple sash. So it's very interesting now that someone who mostly was dominated by secondary colors at the start and the primary colors were all very subtle has now flipped, in which all the primary colors are taking center stage and the secondary colors that once defined him are taking a vast backseat, if they're even there to begin with. So I find that super interesting. And because he's being depicted in this way, it makes him way more important than most of the other characters that hold the same position as him right now, which makes me think he could be becoming the Deuteragonist of One Piece, as it turns out, because it's also quite interesting that once Cross Guild has been established, a sneaky cheat is being performed because it's made up of characters who have existed in the story for nearly the entirety of the story, like Buggy. So it's quite funny that his crew is made up of people that we know. However, when talking about Shanks and Blackbeard, the majority of them are still new characters. You don't know anything about anyone basically on his crew, other than maybe Kuzan, I guess. But the majority of the characters are unknowns. However, when it comes to Luffy and when it comes to Bucky, we know everyone so far. A point has been made to know all of these characters over the course of the narrative. So that's why I'm saying these two are sticking out very, very uniquely from the other two in the same station. And I find that fascinating because you wouldn't expect this to happen, but it most definitely has happened. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Waxy.